and hubbub for literally over a year about James Comey's firing. James Comey was fired as head of the FBI because James Comey refused to say that President Trump was in the clear with regard to the Russia investigation, or at least that President Trump was not under investigation. And Trump got mad about that, and so he fired James Comey. He made that pretty clear at the time. Well, James Comey immediately came out after that, just to recapitulate the history. James Comey came out after that, and he leaked some contemporaneous memos to one of his friends, a Columbia University law professor. He took these memos that he'd written that were supposed to be notes of meetings that he'd had with Trump, and he leaked them to one of his friends so that they'd get out in the press with the express purpose of trying to get a special prosecutor involved. The idea here was this, that President Trump had fired Comey, and now the DOJ had recommended that on the basis of Rod Rosenstein. So remember, Jeff Sessions had recused himself from everything Russia-related, and that meant that Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, was the guy who wrote a letter saying that James Comey should be fired. President Trump used that letter as the basis for firing James Comey. James Comey then leaked a bunch of memos about his relationship with Trump to the press in the hopes that that Rosenstein would have to recuse himself and appoint a special prosecutor. Because once it became clear that Trump had actually done this over the Russia stuff and Rosenstein had been involved in the firing of James Comey, then suddenly a special prosecutor is necessary. That's why these memos became a big issue in the first place. It was on the basis of these memos that James Comey was called in front of Congress to testify. It was on the basis of these memos that James Comey got his big book deal. And it's on the basis of those memos that James Comey is now running around on television every single night. So yesterday, the DOJ turned over these memos to Congress. There's some controversy related to this because remember, the DOJ had suggested that originally these memos could not become public because it would be a serious infringement on national security. Classified material would make it into the public sphere if these memos were to be made public. There's an ongoing investigation involving the memos. Why should they be given to Congress? Well, yesterday they said, fine, we'll hand them over to Congress. Okay, and then within 5 minutes of them being handed over to Congress, the Associated Press had them, the Washington Post had them, everybody in the press had them. And so here is what you need to know from the Comey memos. First of all, there's really nothing groundbreaking about the Comey memos themselves. So everything that you knew that James Comey had already said, he said in these memos. So his contemporaneous memos are very consistent with what he has been saying publicly. According to James Comey, he went to President Trump. He told him about the Russian dossier that was compiled by Christopher Steele at the behest of Fusion GPS, which was paid by the Hillary Clinton campaign. So try to follow me here. Hillary Clinton paid Fusion GPS, which paid Christopher Steele to compile a dossier on President Trump. And that dossier made its way to the FBI. And James Comey showed the most salacious parts of that dossier to President Trump. And Trump and Comey at length discussed the infamous P tape. Of course, this is the portion of the dossier alleging that President Trump went to Russia in 2013 and had Russian prostitutes pee on a bed once occupied by the Obamas, which is real weird. Okay. And then Trump apparently told Comey at one point that Putin had bragged about the quality of Russian hookers, which is like, okay, whatever. And then apparently Trump joked about jailing reporters and Comey laughed about it. And Trump said that Michael Flynn had serious judgment issues, which is not a great shock. He ended up firing his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and then asking James Comey if there was any way he could see himself cleared to letting Michael Flynn go, which is not obstruction since he didn't actually pressure Comey to let Michael Flynn go. So why do these memos matter? Why do these memos matter? Well, there are a few reasons these memos matter. So on the left, they're suggesting these memos matter because James Comey now looks more consistent. It looks like he's been consistent in his story throughout. Okay, fair enough. But there's some problems for James Comey in the memos. Okay, first problem for James Comey in the memos. First of all, the memos themselves have some redactions. That means that some of the material in the memos is still classified. Well, that raises a question. Was James Comey leaking classified material from his memos to the press? If so, that's actually a crime. Now, Comey says he only leaked one memo to his friend, and that memo was unclassified, but we're going to have to figure this thing out because the fact is that according to the letter from the DOJ to Congress releasing these memos, quote, pursuant to your request, we are providing the requested memoranda in both redacted and unredacted formats for your convenience. The unredacted documents are classified, and we will provide those in a separate secure transmittal to the House Security Office tomorrow, which seems to imply that Comey's memos were not all unclassified. Okay, also, this seems to suggest that the DOJ fibbed about the importance of the memos in the first place. As I mentioned, the DOJ refused to turn over the memos when requested under the Freedom of Information Act last year. They claimed that the release of the memos would somehow impede the Mueller investigation. Nothing in the memo seems to suggest this is true. The memos also do not suggest obstruction, so this is a point in favor of President Trump. After the release of the memos, Representatives Devin Nunes, Bob Goodlatte, Trey Gowdy, they tore into Comey. They said, quote, the memos show that the president made clear he wanted allegations of collusion, coordination, and conspiracy between his campaign and Russia fully investigated. Furthermore, the memos demonstrate that Trump didn't want Russian election interference investigation ended, but the suggestion that he had engaged in lewd personal conduct, he wanted it investigated. So he was much more concerned with the allegations about the P-tape than he was concerned about the idea that Russia interfered in the election. He wasn't seeking to shut anything down or direct the investigation in any particular direction except on the P-tape, according to the Comey memos. As the congressmen point out, the memos also show former Director Comey never wrote that he felt obstructed or threatened, which is, of course, true. He didn't feel obstructed or threatened until he was fired, at which point it became sour grapes. Maybe I was fired because of obstruction, as opposed to I was fired because I'm wildly incompetent at my job. It is also true that these memos show that James Comey held the Trump administration and President Trump to a different standard than he held members of the Obama administration. So Comey has stated he interfered in the Hillary Clinton email investigation in an unprecedented way, right? He went out there, he did his big press conference where he announced basically why Hillary Clinton should be indicted and then said she shouldn't be indicted. He did that in an attempt to shield Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, from allegations of bias or corruption. Well, he never wrote contemporaneous memos about his meetings with Loretta Lynch or Barack Obama during that time, even though he was so worried about it that he interfered in the middle of an investigation in a way that is wildly unprecedented. He only reserved those memos for Trump. And this is what the congressmen point out. They say, quote, he chose not to memorialize conversations with President Obama, Attorney General Lynch, Secretary Clinton, Andrew McCabe, or others, but he immediately began to memorialize conversations with President Trump. These memos also lay bare the notion that former Director Comey is not motivated by animus. Comey also never bothered to try to launch a special counsel investigation against Lynch and Clinton through leaks. Also worth noting in these memos, Comey defended McCabe repeatedly and personally to President Trump. It now turns out that McCabe was, in fact, lying repeatedly and now is under criminal investigation. That came out yesterday that Andrew McCabe has been now referred by the IG for criminal investigation on the basis of leaking to the press a bunch of stories about his involvement in the Hillary Clinton Foundation scandal and his attempts to investigate it. So the Comey memos don't actually help Comey's case. In fact, they sort of hurt it. They don't show us anything we didn't already know. But they do undercut the case that Comey was being pressured in any real way by President Trump. All of this prompted President Trump to tweet. So here's what President Trump tweeted about all of this. Quote, James Comey memos just out and show clearly there was no collusion and no obstruction. Also, he leaked classified information. Wow. Will the witch hunt continue? Okay, so again, do I think it's ill-advised for Trump to tweet this? Yes, but is he right? Yeah, he is. I mean, there's no collusion, no obstruction, and it is pretty clear that he may have leaked classified information. So all of this whole thing, this whole special counsel investigation, which was launched on the basis, not the Russia investigation, the special counsel Mueller investigation, which was launched on the back of Comey's memos, seems really weak. There's another theory that is now being put out there by Molly Hemingway over at the Federalist that is worth noting here. That what the memos really show is that that James Comey and James Clapper, the former head of the CIA, and the press were in cahoots in their attempts to get the information about the P-tape out into the public sphere. So here's what Molly Hemingway writes. So she writes, quote, in multiple memos, Comey specifically mentioned that CNN had the dossier, the famous P-tape dossier, and wanted a news hook that would enable the network to report on its most salacious allegations, even though they had not been verified. So in the memos, it says this, quote, I said the Russians allegedly had tapes involving him and prostitutes at the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton in Moscow from about 2013. I said I wasn't saying this was true, only that I wanted him to know both that it had been reported and that the reports were in many hands. No media organizations had reported the allegations at the time that Comey briefed Trump, says Molly Hemingway. I said media like CNN had them and were looking for a news hook, Comey added in his memo about the briefing with Trump on January 6, 2017. On January 28, 2017, Comey wrote that in a separate meeting, Trump mentioned the allegation about the alleged tape of prostitutes at the hotel and called it fake news. Comey said, I explained again why I had thought it important that he know about it. I also explained that one of the reasons we told him was that the media, CNN in particular, was telling us they were about to run with it. Well, this is all weird. Why is this weird? Because on January 10th, just 4 days after James Comey briefed the President of the United States about the P-tape, there was a CNN story, and it said, quote, Intel chiefs presented Trump with claims of Russian efforts to compromise him. Extremely well-placed sources told CNN that the Obama administration's top intelligence appointees had briefed Obama, Biden, and Trump all about a dossier they took incredibly seriously and considered credible. But it sounded really bad, as the headline indicated. CNN declared Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump. And just a few minutes later, BuzzFeed published the actual dossier, showing the world that the dossier was riddled with salacious gossip that lacked even a possibility of corroboration. So remember, here's the logic. James Comey and company, right? They tell Trump that we may have a media scandal on our hands if they can find a news hook. And then what does CNN use as the news hook? The fact that James Comey told President Trump that he may have a media scandal on his hand. You see how the circular system works here? So I'll explain more of that in just a second. First, I want to say thanks